Hello, my name is Justin Willett, and this is episode 1 of If You Can, You Must, a service dog podcast. Today's guest in episode 1 will be Dr. Jacqueline Lowman. She's a full-time professor at the University of Maine at Presque Isle, and she's got some great stories to tell about her 2 service dogs. How are you today, Dr. Lowman?
I'm great. How are you?
Not bad at all. So the reason we asked you to be on the first episode of If You Can, You Must is because we know you have some amazing stories about service dogs and just stories in general.
We have a lot of stories. We have a lot to share. You'll have to kind of beat me up with a stick when we get to the end of our time, I think.
It's not bad at all. So give us a little bit of background on yourself and your 2 service dogs. We can't see them right now, but Saint and Dusty, we know, are 2 labs. Saint is 11 or 10 years old now.
Saint will be 12 on New Year's Eve. And Dusty, the baby, was 3 in July. So let me tell you a little bit about them. And they may get active at some point. It's kind of a good thing because it's a rainy day. So they're probably, I'm hoping that they don't start doing somersaults and back of me, but who knows, they might.
Oh, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. But you probably can see them. They're tucked into the bed over my.
Yeah, actually we can see Dusty, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I am a person with lifelong disabilities. I was born with them. They happen pre-birth, congenital. And many people, I think, who have lifelong disabilities, we're very used to coping. We're very used to kind of getting by. And we find ways to do things, even if it's not the traditional way to do them. And so as I got older, my disabilities became more severe. Age doesn't usually help those things. And I got to the point where I thought, wow, I'm really not able to do many things in my life, in my daily living activities. I wonder when I'll be bad enough off to be eligible to get a service dog. And I asked my primary care, my physician, when do you think? And she said, well, at birth. And I'm like, oh, okay, wow. So I knew then that, what took you so long? And so I went through the application process, and that can take a couple of years. So it takes a while to get screened. And then once you get screened, you go on a list and they sort of customize a dog for you. And that process can take 1.5 to 2 years. And so lots of times. And then there's more demand than there are dogs because of the dogs they train, only about 1/3 of them make it as service dogs. So it's process, as I say. So I got Saint in 2010.
Was it a physician who first mentioned that the service dog idea? You said you asked your physician about it, but was that the first time you heard of it, or had you been suggested that before?
I'm a teacher, I'm a researcher, I'm a reader and a watcher. And so I knew that there were service dogs. And as I became more and more incapacitated, I thought, I need something so I can continue to live fully. And my options were a service dog or having to have a personal care attendant who would be a human. And people can be extremely lovely, but I live in northern Maine. We have a very long winter. Yeah. There would be days that I would not be able to get out of bed or do anything because my person, unless I had somebody come and live with me all the time, which would be very expensive, among all kinds of other things. So the service dog idea was very attractive, and I did a lot of research on it and found a number of organizations, and then, is this a possibility for me? And then talked to my primary care provider, and it's like, well, of course, what took you so long? And so then I got busy. I applied to a couple of places. For Saint, I got accepted by both places, but I went with the one that I heard from first. And when you get a service dog, well, I think this is probably something that all of the places mention. I've only gone with 2 providers, so I can't tell you universally. But they'll tell you that your dog, if your dog is healthy and you take good care of your dog and nothing horrible happens, your dog can usually work until the dog is about 10. And so as Saint was getting to be 8 and 9, I thought, I need to apply. It was really hard because I want Saint to live forever, but that's probably not going to happen. So I didn't want to wait until Saint died, because then that's 2 years beyond that you have to go through before you get another dog. So and people said to me, how can you do that? And it's like, well, because I have to. So
I think that's actually something a lot of people don't know about service dogs that you would definitely agree with. They're a tool for you.
They are. Great point. I'm sorry, I'm cutting you off. Yeah.
No, that's exactly what I was going to say. A lot of people might think they're pets, or because they're so used to having dogs as pets, they forget that a service dog is not, it's a tool before it is that friend.
I don't have, great point. I don't have a service dog because I'm lonely or because I want a puppy. I have a service dog because I can't walk, because I can't get up on things to get things. And so they are a tool, and that's why they're protected. And I know we'll get to that in a bit, by the Americans with Disabilities Act. So when people will say, you love her like your child, I love her like my legs. And so I love her because, them, I shouldn't say her, I've got Saint first, they're a part of me. And so something that is disconcerting for a lot of people, I think, I tend to speak in we and not I. And people are like, well, that's really weird. I don't think it is, because I don't go any place. It's not just this body, it's 3 bodies. And so I have 16 legs, because I have my 2 legs, the girls each have 4, and then my wheelchair has 6. And so I'm shooting to become a centipede at some point. And so it's always we. It's not I'm going to do this. It's we're going to do this, because you get to be one mind and heart in multiple units, but it's a we.
And how different is that compared to, I know you've had dogs before. How different was that than your other dogs?
I've always had dogs, and I've always loved my dogs, and I've never had a bad dog, but none of them were service dog material. And you never get away from your service dog. I mean, you wouldn't want to, but you're closer to your service dog than you would be to any person, because your dog is always with you. You go, going in the bathroom is a social occasion with my dogs, and we go every place together. So they go to work with me. They go when I go to the doctor or any kind of appointment. And I would never have done that or have been able to do that with a pet. When I go to the dentist and I have to do the x-ray thing and they put the lead apron, Saint is up on me. So they put the lead apron over Saint and me. And Saint's just like, okay, this is okay. So they're a part of you. They truly are a part of you.
And where did you get Saint and Dusty?
I got Saint from, you'd like to know the name of the organization or the location?
Tell us a little bit about that process through training. I know you said you got Saint a while ago now, and that the application process takes a year or two. What happens once you actually get to the dog?
So you go through a screening process, and so you fill out paperwork, even if it's digital. You fill out this work, and you have to have corroboration from your primary care provider, your physician, and you have to have letters of recommendation that you're somebody who knows something about dogs, or you could learn. So this, and then once you get through that first screening phase, then there's usually a phone interview, and then there's either on site or a Zoom or a FaceTime, so that people can see where you live and everything.
Yeah, I look like this, a live.
They have to look over your where you live. And they ask you about other people you live with, and you have other dogs. And so they ask you all of these different things. And then you get, I think it's still probably a letter that, okay, you're on our list. And then depending on what your needs are and the dogs they're training, then you get, and the dogs have to go through this really rigorous, they're constantly being evaluated. They have to have the right intelligence and the right temperament, because you can't have a service dog, or you shouldn't have a service dog, that you can't trust, that you're afraid that it's going to snap at somebody, or because when we go to a store or someplace like that, and I might be sitting there looking at something, and a little child will come up and throw itself on. And it's always kind of a surprise. And my girls, my dogs will be like, oh, okay, little kid. So you can't have a dog that's not going to be a good citizen, be able to be out in public, and or going to be,
especially at school, you're constantly meeting new people. That's something that if to have an aggressive service dog obviously wouldn't work especially in your circumstances.
No. So it can't be a dog that I'd be thinking, oh, is my dog going to try to bite somebody if they approach unexpectedly? They have to be really, really trustworthy. And
not fearful, right?
So an aggressive dog is very dangerous. Probably the most dangerous type of dog, and I don't mean a breed, would be a timid dog. Because a timid dog is, oh, back in a corner. I'm backed into a corner, and so right. I'm going to do anything. And so they have to be, although my girls, very different personalities, but they have to be really mellow and just nothing really phases them. Dusty's very excited. Dusty's always like, this is great. Saint is more of an old soul always, but they're both nothing really bothers them. They're just like, okay, this is kind of interesting. We've not done this before, but okay, we're good with it.
A lot easier than it would be to have people there.
I do like people, but there are things that, I think one of the nice things about having a service dog is that you can maintain your dignity. I know that probably sounds kind of odd, but I don't think that a person coming to help me would go out and like, oh, listen, America, I've seen Jacqui Lowman, without this on or something. But my dogs, it's a game. It's an important game, but they like doing it. It's like, wow, this is cool. We get to help mommy pull off her shoes and pull off her socks. And I think I'd always be sort of, even though I would pay the person, I'd be kind of a little bit apologetic. Like, oh, I know you probably have better things to do. And my girls, they're purpose bred. They're bred to be of service. That's their whole reason for being. And so they're like, this is so cool. Mommy dropped it 10 times in a row. Wow, I get to do this 10 times and show how useful I am. So they never get tired of doing it. And they asked me when I was going through the screening process, do you drop things? And I said, yes. And they said, how often? And I said, well, on a bad day, I could drop it repeatedly. My hands don't always work the same, and they don't work very well. They can train any dog to pick something up once. But dogs have their own personalities, and so they have dogs that be like, okay, I picked it up once.
Personalities right now, they're wrestling.
Yeah, yeah. And so, because they are a tool, but they're still animate beings, and so they have personalities, they have things that they want to do, they love to play. They don't play in class, they've got their gear on. We're home, they're chilling out, it's like, okay. Yeah.
They know this is about them.
Absolutely, and so they're demonstrating, it's like, see, we're alert, we have personalities, aren't we clever and cute? Absolutely, they know.
On the show. And that's actually, you mentioned that it wasn't until 2010 when you actually got Saint, but your doctor said what took you so long? You couldn't have gotten a service dog even if you wanted to very early on, right?
A big turning point came about starting like in the 1960s, because there's all these different laws. And so 1964, the Civil Rights Act. And that was about race. But people with the advocates for people with disabilities, they're watching. And so in 1973, there was the Rehabilitation Act. And that was a federal law. And that's when there started to be vocational rehabilitation programs in the different states.
And this is in 73, you said?
In 73.
It's interesting because we know about Mr. Roosevelt.
And Mr. Roosevelt didn't want anybody to know about the polio and having the braces and everything. So when he was lifted in and out of a car, for example, the press was very nice and they didn't photograph anything like that.
That's an example of the stigma you're mentioning. Even the president of the United States would not be willing to show that he was in a wheelchair. Like, people thought it was really that bad of a thing.
Absolutely. And so he would be able to speak at a podium because he would wear these leg braces. And so they would get him kind of in place. And so when they were making the monument to FDR, Roosevelt, a lot of us, I belonged to different listservs, and one of the listservs I belonged to was called Not Dead Yet. And so we wrote in masses that we wanted there to be some recognition at his monument of him in a wheelchair. So they have all kinds of things at his monument. When we went to DC, I really wanted to go to see this monument. So there's one of him life-size in his wheelchair, which wasn't a power, it's an old kind of wicker. But I've got a photo somewhere of me sitting with my arm around him in his wheelchair, because I was really proud that because so many people spoke up about it, there was this recognition. So very belatedly. And so then there's the Fair Housing Act in 68, and then it was modified in 88 so that people could have a service dog. But the big one, as you mentioned, and there was the Air Carrier Access Act. So that's what governs people when they fly. And so it does have different stipulations about people in wheelchairs, people with service dogs. 1990, finally, there was the Americans with Disabilities Act.
This is 1990. That's only 30 years ago.
Yes.
This is not in our distant past whatsoever.
No.
Saw all of this legislation pass in your lifetime.
Absolutely. And one of the big things, very, very touching, very moving, very powerful, because people with disabilities, it can be difficult to mobilize because you've got these people with challenges to begin with, and so having them. But there was at least one protest where people went to the Capitol, the U.S. Capitol, and they got out of their wheelchairs and they crawled up the steps.
The huge staircase outside the United States Capitol. Famous steps there. Yeah, very powerful message, I'd imagine.
Yeah. And so George H.W. Bush signed this into law in 1990. Well, people were concerned because the ADA has these different titles, they call them. And so there's one about employment. There's one for the state and localities. And so they have to be accessible. There's one about accommodations, and that would be not just lodging, but restaurants, stores. There's one about telecommunication. And so very much for people who are deaf. And so they have to have these devices so they can still use phones. And then there's one the Title V is about how it interacts with other laws. So people were like, well, this is going to cost me money. So there were a lot of court cases. And gradually, the ADA was chipped away until 2000. Excuse me?
Before it ever even was a thing.
It was a thing, but it was like, well, but it really isn't. But people sued. Well, but you can't expect us to make our doorways wider or have a curb cut. And so it got eroded over time. And so in 2008, there was something called the ADA-AA. So it was the Americans with Disabilities Act Amendments Act. So, no, we did really mean this. And so it was that 2008 to 2010 when they clarified a lot about service animals. And so the governing law for service animals now is this 2010 clarification that says the only service animal is a dog, and in some very restricted cases, a miniature horse. So you don't have your service monkey, or your service.
The first generation of the real service animal then, yes, so to speak.
She came out of the womb. It's like, here I am. Yeah, because I got her in 2010. She was born in 2008. Just as this was
kind of as old as the ADAAA.
Yeah.
Your dog, your first service dog. That is just, it's astonishing to think about how long it took. Because as you mentioned, there have always been people who had disabilities, who were in wheelchairs, just different limitations, into only within the last few years.
Yeah. And there's tremendous lack of knowledge. And so because there's this lack of knowledge, there's tremendous discrimination because people don't know. And so knowledge is a good weapon.
So what does the ADA mean to you? I mean, obviously it's affected you a lot, and you've seen, especially recently, I'm sure you have some stories as a teacher being the only wheelchair user at our university.
But I believe I'm the only faculty member, full-time wheelchair user in the University of Maine system.
In 7 campuses in the state university system.
Yeah. And so what the ADA means to me is human rights, social justice. I've done a lot of research in this area because I'm so incredibly lucky. So the CDC estimates that 26% of the US population has some level of a disability. And I won't bore the viewers, the listeners to how many millions. But of the millions of people, and of course it's going to get more as the population ages and as medicine improves and people survive things. And that was a big impetus behind the ADA, because we had people coming back from combat, from Iraq and Afghanistan, things that would have killed people. They survived them. The medicine had improved.
Right.
But then what were their prospects for life? And so that was a big motivator.
Motivating factors for service dogs in general.
Absolutely.
Military servicemen and women who came back, and that really puts it in the faces of people who can make a difference, really. Because
how can you say to somebody and not look like who's risked his or her life for you and your level of freedom and say, now we're going to warehouse you in an institution because you're less than. And so very, 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 very motivating. So for me, the ADA is freedom. 100 years ago, I would have been locked in an attic. There wouldn't have been any future. So it's also for me, it's responsibility, because I know the ADA. I'm one of the lucky ones. I'm one of the lucky few. Out of people with disabilities, before the pandemic hit, they estimate that fewer than 20% had a job of any kind.
Wow. And
a lot of those jobs would be sheltered workshop, Walmart greeter. And there is, and I should have done my homework, I can't tell you what the name of the stipulation is, but there is a stipulation that people with disabilities who are this kind of sheltered workshop, they don't have to get paid minimum wage. They can get paid like $1.60 to $3.60 an hour.
Why is that?
Because the idea is, well, these people couldn't compete, so we're giving them, I would say in my very colloquial way, we're going to throw them a crumb. We're giving them something to do, and so they should be really glad that they get that. Right. But they can't have a life. They can't afford to live on that.
Yeah, it's like human rights. I mean, why do these people not deserve the same quality of life, at least the same chances as everyone else?
And so people and so there's all kinds of stigma, there's all kinds of prejudice. It comes from fear, it comes from lack of knowledge, I think. But often people with disabilities can be among the most dedicated employees. They're not going to call in sick because, I kind of have a headache, or I don't feel quite like I want to go to work today. They're like, I'm going to be there.
Yeah. Nobody else had to overcome the same challenges just to get to work.
Yeah. So for me, the ADA, as I say, so it's given me incredible opportunities, but I had to know the law. I had to know the opportunities were there, and I had to be able to advocate for them, because the majority of the people that I was dealing with did not know the law, did not know, no, this is a requirement. This isn't a preference. This is an accommodation that the law says you have to make. And the ADA is set up so the person with the disability has to be the person who says, this is what I need. And that can be really hard, because
Nobody likes asking for help ever.
and you're thinking, oh my gosh, everybody else here is kind of like, why do you have to be in this group? Because we could just have this thing on the third floor of the building that has no elevator, but you have to be here, so we have to make an accommodation. So, but I know the law. I don't know what percentage of people since the pandemic have been affected, but I know just within my profession, I belong to a professional organization, and it's almost all academics. And it's 1,000 members, and only one other person in my organization is a wheelchair user. And I mentioned about my university system.
Less than 0.1%.
Yeah. So there aren't many of us out there, and there should be. Academia should be something, because it shouldn't matter if I can walk. That shouldn't have any impact on my ability to teach. So I think it's because it's very hard, because you face a lot of challenges. You face challenges, everyone faces challenges, but you're facing challenges anyway. And then you've got the attitudinal challenges as well, the barriers of people not knowing or not being receptive.
In a very recent example of this, I know New Brunswick did their elections a couple weeks ago, and in most towns moved their voting locations due to COVID-19 restrictions. And when they moved them, they didn't think about accessible entrances. So people in New Brunswick with disabilities did not vote. That is an entire portion of your population that wasn't accounted for. That is just a huge injustice.
It is. So it comes back to human rights. And so you're probably the largest group of underrepresented, because we have all underrepresented populations, probably the largest one is people with disabilities. That's a quarter of your population in this country, more than. And so it's a huge segment, and it tends to be under-recognized because, unfortunately, so many people with disabilities tend to be underemployed, not really doing terribly well economically. So it's not a matter of just jumping on your computer and banging out emails to your legislatures and things like that. It's just, I mean, there's so many layers that are complex.
You mentioned some of the challenges that people have to go through just to make it to get that level playing field. I know a few years ago, you have an amazing story of Saint and something that happened to you. Saint saved your life. And just in a short amount of time, you went from knocking on death's doorstep to right back in the classroom, more determined than any people even had to slow you down in order to get back in the classroom. You were trying to go months before you were ready. And so that says something. I'm sure you're not alone in that willpower either. There's probably a lot of people out there who've got that same, just like you said, when you feel the headache, you don't notice it. But I'll let you tell the story, because I know I've heard it a couple of times, and it's an amazing story of what really service dogs can do for people.
Yes, great, thank you. So as somebody with lifelong disabilities, the headache doesn't slow me down. I'm not minimizing people who have severe headaches, but if your leg was caught in the trap, you'd gnaw off your leg, because you just keep going, because you're used to having things that you have to overcome. And so I tend to be, despite the fact that I have some very significant severe disabilities, I tend to be pretty healthy. So I don't miss a lot of work because I have a cold or I have this or have that. In the summer of 2012, I wasn't feeling well. And it has to be pretty noticeable for me to notice it. And I didn't have any energy and I was having a hard time. I would eat something and afterwards I would get pain. And I think because of the things I've dealt with in my life, I think if it had been somebody else, maybe they were like, wow, this is really weird. But I was like, well, I guess I'm allergic to X. And so I kept eliminating things from my diet until I got down to ginger ale and saltines, which is not a great diet. But I kept schlepping along. By the time I got...
entire time.
Excuse me?
This was all taking place during school. You were teaching this entire time, correct?
I was, and then I got into the summer, and I was doing research, and I went down for an appointment, and I kept going, and then got into the fall, and we were supposed to go to a conference in October. Supposed to go to Hawaii, and I've never been to Hawaii, so I was really excited. St. got special shots.
Especially leaving northern Maine in October to Hawaii.
Yeah, it's like, oh my gosh, Hawaii. So I was very excited. But the periodic pain wasn't going away. And I had a couple of episodes where I had to go to the emergency room. I had one night, it was a Friday night, I was at school, and the pain was so severe, I thought, I'm going to faint. And so I put my head down and called a friend. She didn't even recognize my voice and I said, something's wrong. They took me to the hospital. I went in an ambulance and they said, oh, you're borderline anemic. So better watch that. I was like, okay. But I kept teaching, kept working. And I got to the beginning of October, because the end of October was the conference.
No improvement.
And something wasn't right. So I went home. It was the week before I was going to go to the conference. Monday night, I went home from work because I would go to work every day. And I couldn't get comfortable. I tried to lie down and I just had this pain. So every time I went to the emergency room, they would do an EKG and they would say, well, your heart's fine. And I kept saying, it's not my heart. I know it's not my heart, but people didn't listen.
I'm sure you've had enough experience with doctors and in doctors' offices to know that.
Yeah. It's like, it's not my heart. So it was a Monday night and it got to be about midnight. And I thought, I got to get some relief if I can. So my mom was alive, really deaf, very old. I wasn't going to wake her up and say, I'm going to the emergency room. So I was on my way to the emergency room and I stopped by my long-suffering friend, Kim Ann Perkins. And I just wanted somebody to know. I said, I'm on my way to the emergency room. And she said, let me throw on some clothes, I'll go with you. So we were there from midnight to 5 a.m. They did an EKG. They didn't do any blood work or anything like that. And they said, it's not your heart. And I said, I know. So they gave me my Lanta and said, go home. And then they gave me some other stuff to drink. And they said, you're fine. But I wasn't fine. And I was really like washed out. So I missed work. And my students were like, my gosh, what's going on? You're missing work. So we get to the end of the week. And my students were doing focus groups. And I was sitting in on them. And it's late October. And I'm always cold. You can see I'm all bundled up. And I was so hot. I was just sweating like that. And I said to the students, I'm going to go home now. They finished the focus groups. And I said, I'm going to go home. And they said, are you okay? And I said, yeah, I'm okay. Because I thought, well, I'm not going back to the hospital. So I got home and I was really, really weak. And my mom was still alive. And I said, will you feed my dogs? Our dog, because they were my dogs. And she said, are you okay? And I said, yeah. So I went upstairs and I thought, well, I'll just lie down on the top of the bed, like I'll pull on the covers. And the pain got terrible. And every time I tried to get up, I would faint from the pain. So my dogs got fed and they came running up So I had Saint and I had a golden retriever, and here's Saint poking her head up. I'm talking about you, so they're like, here we are. And so every time I tried to get up, the pain made me pass out. And so Saint kept me alive all night. She kept licking me and dropping things on me because I kept telling her to leave me alone. I kept telling her, I'm okay, but I wasn't okay. And she knew that. And so she kept me alive. And then about 6 a.m., I was coherent enough that I could call poor Kim Ann and say, because my mother was deaf, I couldn't call loudly enough for her to hear me. She also couldn't come upstairs. I live on the upstairs of my house, so I needed some help. So I called Kim Ann, and Kim Ann came out, and she said, "You gotta go to the hospital." Here, because I called her and I said, "You got to come out and let the dogs out," because my mother would have locked the door at night. She said, "You got to go to the hospital." I said, "No, I'm not going to go. I'm not going to go back to that guy." And she said, "No, it's daylight now. It's daytime, so it'll be a different person." And so she drove me. She drove the van and got me there. And as I was trying to explain what was going on, I fainted again. And that they did blood work, and your hemoglobin's supposed to be at 12, and mine was a 5. So they said, you're hemorrhaging somewhere.
Yeah, no blood.
Yeah. And I said, okay, but I got to get out of here to go to Hawaii. Well, I didn't get out of there.
Hawaii.
Yeah. So what was happening was I was slowly bleeding to death. And then while I was in ICU, I was having an aneurysm and it burst. And so if I hadn't been in the hospital, I would have.
They hadn't woken you up.
Yeah, I would have died. So because of Saint, they were doing tests and I was in the room and you're all got stuff hooked. And I was feeling really nauseated. By the time I wanted to call for help, I couldn't. I was just, and then everything let go. So I was bleeding out of my mouth, every opening in my body was bleeding. They were going to give up on me because it was so bad. They just thought it was over. They went out and they faced my friend, and she's like, go back in there and work on her. So because of my friend and because of Saint, because I wouldn't have ever awakened again. I was, and I didn't want to. When Saint kept reviving me, and I'm like, no, leave me alone, leave me alone. But because of her, she saved my life.
And that's not really something they train all service dogs for. Saint just has that relationship with you to realize that wasn't normal behavior for you, and she needed to take care of you.
Yeah. So Saint's like, something's wrong. Something's wrong with Mummy. Mummy's not just sleepy. Something bad is happening to Mummy, and I'm not going to listen to Mummy when she says, leave me alone. I'm going to bring her back somehow. And she did. And so I would not be alive without Saint. My golden retriever, he was just a pet. He was alive. And my golden retriever was just like, hey, she wants to go to sleep. I'll go to sleep. I mean, he wasn't going to save me. He was just zapped out in the bed. But Saint kept me alive. And so I truly owe her my life.
Dusty's got some big shoes to fill.
She does. And so Dusty's like, well, okay. But of course, Dusty's a licker. Saint's not a licker, so that was really unusual. Dusty is like, it's like being waterboarded. She wakes you up because she's like,
Full of dog.
Yes. And so Dusty, if you laugh, the tongue goes down your throat, it's in your nostrils. And so that's Dusty. So I guess she would revive me because she's like, yeah.
She'd be wanting to play too bad.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I mean, we've heard that story a few times in class, but every time we hear it, it's just like, you want to tip your cap to Saint, and service dogs don't get those awards, but they really do deserve it.
I should have nominated her. We have a local Red Cross Heroes Award, and I should have nominated Saint for the Heroes Award because she certainly did something that was life-saving, and just gave her an extra piece of pepperoni. That's all she gave. She didn't expect anything, but she's like, oh, this is cool. I got an extra chew stick. Wow, this is great.
Yeah. And it definitely, I'd say it brought out a new part of your journey as well. I mean, that's when a lot of things for you kicked off and you started to give back in different ways than you already were.
Great point. Yes. So I like what I do. I like my job. I'm a teacher. And that was way beyond what most people's expectations ever had been for me. Leaving aside my dad, but most people was like, oh, you're never going to go to college. You're never going to have a job. Never, never, never. And so I was like, okay, you got through school, you got a job. But the blood loss, I had to be transfused 12 pints of blood, which is more than you have in your body, but they had to keep putting blood in. I lost my ability to speak. I lost my ability to move as well, but I already was in a wheelchair. And my ability to move came back pretty quickly. I was able to do that. And I said to people, did I have a stroke? And they said, no, you just had such a shock to your system that it takes time. And so I had an enforced amount of time to think. I'm always thinking, but usually I'm thinking about, oh, how can I do this better in my class? Or how can I do this or that? And yes, people had to really, they didn't sit me down, they set me down. And they said, you're not going back to school this semester. Because I was just going to jump right back in, no way. And so I had a couple of months where, what does this mean? Because I should have died. Like I shouldn't have died because or I'd be dead, but everything was, it defied any rational explanation. How can a very small person have that kind of blood loss and live? And so it's like, okay, what do I want to do with this opportunity? It's an opportunity.
Second chance.
Absolutely. I think very few people, this isn't scientific, I'm not running around doing a survey, but I think very few people truly yet, people use that term, but I really had a second chance. They said, when they put me on the life flight to go to Bangor, they said to my friend, and I could hear, but I couldn't respond. They said, she's dead. She is not going to survive this flight. Now, I knew I was going to. I knew I was going to be okay. But you're kind of inside thinking, no, it's going to be okay.
You have a bad review. Yeah. I heard this guy talking about me.
Yeah. And so my friend knew because she watched my eyes, so she knew that I was following what people were saying, but scary. I knew it would be okay, but I was really glad that I had Saint and Kim Ann on my side. Yeah.
Good team there.
Yeah. So it was a second chance. And I do like what I do. I do like being a teacher, but it wasn't enough. I needed to do something else to give back. And teaching, and my family's like, why can't you be satisfied? Well, that's not the key to a good life, I don't think. You don't want to ever be satisfied.
Until you live it.
Yeah. And so it's like, well, I can do more. I can do additional things. Yeah.
And
so
if you must.
Yeah, absolutely. As my dad would say, if you can do something to make a difference, then you must do it. And saying, oh, but I'm in a wheelchair, or I'm tired, I can't walk. Yeah, and your point is?
What are some of the things you've done? I know the story. We've got a good relationship, and of course, spent a lot of time together through our classes, but I know you have really done some not only visually representative things, but also things that most people would not even think about trying for themselves, and you just do it on top of everything else.
So one of the problems with me is that I'm like a child. I have no fear. And so, and maybe that comes from dying and coming back, or almost dying and coming back, whatever. And so, because to me, it's always, well, what's the worst thing that can happen? So I don't want to put other people at risk, but it's like, well, I can try that. So I joke and say it took until, because I'm not a young person, I had to wait until I was a middle-aged person to become a jock. I was never a jock when I was young. And so.
You needed that second chance.
Absolutely. And so I always wanted to go whitewater rafting. And I never was able to learn to swim. And so when I was going to do this, and a lot of rafting companies wouldn't take me. So they actually broke the law, because you can't discriminate against people, but they did. But I thought, do I really want to go with these outfits if they don't want me? So I was like, no, I don't.
That's also part of the mission you're trying to prove when you're doing these things is you're also supporting that law, teaching other people about the law all the way through, because people really don't know.
They don't. I don't think most people are wretched human beings, like, you know, like evil human beings. I think there's just such a lack of knowledge. And so I did say, because the people wanted to talk to me, and I said, well, I can't swim. And they said, it doesn't matter. If you get tossed out of the whitewater raft when we're in white water, you know, I mean, you could be the best swimmer in the world. You know, you just got to go with the flow, literally. And so, they'd never had a person who couldn't walk, a person with paraplegia, and they'd never had a service dog. And they said, well, they were concerned about Saint's toenails going through the raft. And I said, well, gosh, let's hope your raft is better than this, because, you know, she gets her nails trimmed. It's not like she's got like a, you know, like a Edward
Scissorhands.
Absolutely, you know. So we went whitewater rafting, and I learned, I should have known this already. I am an adrenaline junkie, because it was 4 hours, and I thought 4 hours of rapids. It was 1 hour of rapids. We got through the rapids, and they said, well, that's done it. And I'm like, that's it? And so I didn't have to paddle. So they put me in the middle of the raft, and we had all these young people that were training to be guides, and my friend and Saint was very nervous because she's been on boats, but a raft is different, and it was rough. And I think Saint was just like, I can't take care of her. What do I do? When we got through the rapids, Saint was running the rim of the raft. Saint's like, party time. So we did that, and it was wonderful, and it was very freeing. And we had like class 5 rapids. We got a lot of but it was wonderful. Like you're looking up, you're in this kind of like a chasm, and there's these eagles soaring overhead and everything. And I guess one of the nice things is that I was like the other people in the raft. I mean, they were paddling, but it didn't matter that I couldn't walk, because nobody else was walking either. So that was kind of cool. I learned to ski. I had this great idea, and it was a good idea, because I wanted people with physical challenges or cognitive challenges to be able to get outside. But one of the things about when you have physical disabilities, paraplegia, quadriplegia, it affects your circulation. So you feel the cold more. And so nobody else was stupid enough to go out in a northern Maine winter.
Yeah, nobody skis in the summer, right?
Yeah. So the day I learned to ski, the high was 22 below. And so they strapped me in, you use something called a sit ski. And so they put me in the sit ski, and then people kind of, I say they jumped back. I mean, they didn't, but they stepped back and they said, okay, do a crunch. It's like, what's a crunch? So that's how you propel yourself. So I learned, so at the end of the season, people said, did you get better? Well, there was only one way to go. So I got to where I could go out to our Nordic Heritage Center, and I could get up. I mean, we're not talking like big hills, but I could get up the hill. Coming down was much faster than getting up. So I learned that. And then we climbed, a group of people. My friend Al Levesque designed this carrier. And so we climbed, people always say hiked, but I say we climbed Mount Katahdin, Mile High in northern Maine. And that was a collaborative effort, and that was wonderful. And then after we did that, and people said, what's next? And I said, how about we do Appalachian Trail? So Saint and I have done about 100 miles. We've done sections. And it was wonderful. And we did some hiking in Kentucky as well. But we realized that people thought that Beyond Limits, our nonprofit organization, was all about recreation, physical things. And people weren't making the connection that this is about what people can do. Because the thing that really motivated me was my students who were saying, I can't write a composition, or I can't speak in a public venue. So we decided we should try to do something that was more relatable, because there's a lot of people who lived in Maine all their lives who've never climbed Mount Katahdin or hiked the Appalachian Trail. So Saint and I had the idea, that it's a human right. It's not an idea, it's a fact. It's a human right to be able to get from A to B.
Yeah, right back with that Disabilities Act, the human
Yeah.
rights thing, moving around should be a thing.
So you should be able to get transported, even if you don't do the driving yourself. You should be able to get from one place to another. You should be able to get into a building. There are many things that you should be able to do. You should be able to stay in a lodging, get into a restaurant, get sustenance. And we knew from our experiences that that was not the case. And so we decided that we would drive across the country. And so that's what we did in 2019. Saint and I drove from Maine to the West Coast, Washington, Oregon, and then we drove back through Canada. And we had many adventures, many adventures. And there's a lot of inaccessibility out there still.
I was going to ask about that. How does that, I mean, going coast to coast, I'm sure you see a lot of examples of places where the ADA still has a lot of room to grow. It
does. And I would say that I've learned a lot from my dogs, or maybe so I'm pretty patient, and I'm a teacher. And so it's like, no, it's not okay that I booked this room, the only accessible room in the hotel, and you gave it to somebody else, even though I reserved it with a credit card, because the person wanted a nice big room. That's not okay. Mm-hmm. You're breaking the law. And so, yeah, we had many adventures, a lot of opportunities to educate, a lot of opportunities to write about it, and a lot of motivation to do more, because the law is a good law. It really is a very good law. It's not understood widely, and it's not enforced. The law is good though.
Where's one area of this law you'd like to see grow? Would it be that enforcement? Maybe wider recognition of the law.
Yeah, and so people, I think people, the service dog programs I've gone with have wanted to educate people on their rights to the ADA with service dogs. But the ADA is hundreds and hundreds of pages long, because it's the statute or whatever, and then all of the application pieces, and then the design guidelines. And so it's vast. And I would say probably
read for sure.
I would say probably the majority of people with disabilities don't know the law or many facets of it. Because the law is for people who have something that affects one or more major life functions, have had it, something that, or even are perceived as having it. And so it might be something that you had a limitation, but now you had a recovery or a surgery. But if you're still perceived as having it and are discriminated against because of it, that law protects you, but people don't know that.
Yeah, ironically, the ADA is somewhat inaccessible to people.
It is. And so I was doing some research, and I thought I had the full law, because what I had was hundreds of pages. But then I noticed, because I've been doing some writing about this, some of the titles I don't have. I don't have and so I've got a stack that's this big. There's a lot more, and you can't find it all online. I've got a doctorate, and a doctorate means, research. And so I'm pretty good at digging stuff out. And you can't even find it. And so there are so many people that could be benefiting from this who don't know. And I'd say everybody, because there's nobody who doesn't know someone. You've got a friend, somebody in your family. So it's something that would be universally beneficial. I knew that I wasn't able to find much about anything comparable in Canada. So I thought that probably things wouldn't be as good.
We're very close to Canada here, in case people don't know that. Right here in northern Maine, we have 4 border crossings within an hour from where we are.
Yeah. So northern Maine is still a part of the U.S., but in many ways it's not that different from Canada in some. Okay. So I thought, well, this will be good challenges and opportunities. Everything's, challenges and opportunity. And so all I could find, and I've done more research since the trip, and so Canada does have a law, but the law is very, very slim, and it's confined, all I could find, it was confined to cognitive disability. So very, very restricted. And so Canada also has something that, like, you can't discriminate against people, which is lovely. But one of the strengths of the ADA is you can't discriminate like this or like this or like, so it gives you
Nothing
all
is
these
open to interpretation.
Yeah. And so when we were in Canada, and we were in Canada for a week. So, I mean, we weren't there for months, but it was, it was a while. And we drove across all of Canada in the summertime.
Yeah. When you went Maine, California, Canada, all the way back through, right?
Right. I crossed over in Montana. So I was in Vancouver, but from Saskatchewan and then Manitoba, all across. So thousands of miles. And so I never saw another person in a wheelchair, ever. And I thought, wow. And I mentioned this to my long-suffering friend, Kim Ann, and she said, they've got to have people. I know the population is as big. And I said, oh, absolutely. But there's no way for the people to get anywhere or get into places. So many of the places were not accessible. One day, I was pumping gas. I got really good at pumping gas and washing my windshield, good. And so I saw a sign on the gas pump and it said, please pay inside when you're done. It's like, okay. It wasn't until I was done that I realized that I had to go up these steps. And I couldn't, of course. And so a lady came out, was talking to me, and she was so interested in my van that I drive with hand controls and the wheelchair, because my wheelchair has elevation on it. And she's like, this is amazing. She has a son and a grandson. And I don't know if the son is the parent of the grandson.
Right.
But they have cerebral palsy. And she said, we can't go anyplace as a family because we can't get into anything. We can't get to anything. And she said, I've lived in this town 30-something years. She was older than that. But she said, I wonder if we could do something locally. And I said, absolutely. Don't wait for your federal government to do something. Band together. But they don't have handicap parking. I mean, they had a handicap parking space one place, and it was like out in the Tulies. It's like, you had to get your canteen, no striping. I mean, so there's, and lovely people. So many people in Canada said, you guys in the US are generations ahead of us in terms of this.
And that's so interesting to think, because everyone thinks Canada's healthcare system is so far advanced and the Canadian government just takes care of people. But there's really, it's just not knowing and not paying attention can really, and like you said, the populations are so similar, seeing the differences in how far they are behind, how many people, how many great minds they're missing out on.
And the people, now we stayed at places, if we could, we stayed at chains, so they would be like, but the people didn't know. So they tried to honor the ADA, but there was a great lack of knowledge of the ADA. Right. Of course, I'm in Canada. So I got curious and I started looking. So the United Nations has a list of the laws that countries have. They have links to the laws that countries have for accessibility. And the US is I'll say the great grandma, not the great grandpa. And by far and away, just even if you look and you see these, and when I see a law that's 30 pages long, and we've got this law that's probably like 1,000 plus. Yeah. And so it's not as comprehensive. And so for all the, and there are things about the US that I'm not wild about. We have an excellent law. It needs to be enforced, implemented, understood much more. but nobody, even countries that are very, kind of tend to think like the Scandinavian countries that are very forward thinking and
Yep.
progressive and everything, but they don't have the laws like that. And so what they've got are these very nice kind of blanket, we won't discriminate against anybody. But again, the devil is in the details. And if you
Yes.
don't have those details, people are being discriminated against because people don't even realize that they're doing it. Yeah. So it's a great law. It can always be better.
Mm.
And I'm very, very proud that when it was sort of chipped away at, the legislatures, they went back and they had the Amendments Act. No, we did actually mean this. And so knowing that law, it's kind of like this giant shield that people have.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that they're not going to book your room out from under you, but it means you can say, don't do this again because, I'm reporting this. And so it's an opportunity. And I think having survived that bleed, it's like, okay, so I love teaching. I love teaching my students, but I think my students are not just the people in my classroom.
No, everyone can serve to learn more.